In election 2013, following 8 years of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as the president, we had an election in which the Guardian Council looked at about 700 different candidates. They approved 7 hardliners and 1 moderate. The moderate's name was Hassan Rouhani, and Rouhani emerged with the victory in the election with just over 50% of the vote, 50.7, so no runoff necessary. So this was a big shift now in Iran. We went from the hardline Ahmadinejad to a reformist in Rouhani, or excuse me, a moderate at least in Rouhani. I don't know if reformist is maybe too strong of a word. But anyway, Rouhani was talking about better relations with the West and not being so confrontational, being more level-headed about dealings with other countries and the economy, and not being as up and down as Ahmadinejad had been in so many ways. Heavyweight member, former member of the Assembly of Experts and Expediency Council, the goodwill offensive early on. He gave a speech right away at the United Nations. That's the famous speech at the UN where he, in fact, did then have the presidential phone call with Barack Obama, first presidential phone call between the two countries since 1979. But a lot of people around the world, conservatives in America especially, said this is all just this is only show, there's no substance, and that he is trying to just lure us in, and then we're going to give them concessions, and then they will bite us back. So that always has been the accusation coming from the American right in that vein. So we had a new era with Obama's outreach to Iran, Iran's outreach to the United States. The nuclear negotiations took place shortly thereafter with Secretary of State John Kerry, with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, and so on, with their counterparts, though, and this was largely happening because Supreme Leader Khamenei had given it his blessing. And without Khamenei's blessing, the nuclear accords would not have gone ahead like that. So the battles between the moderates and the conservatives were the battle was on. We talked about the fact that the factionalism in Iran is real and it's intense, and so it played out in any number of ways. The happy dancers to Pharrell Williams in Iran were the pawns in part of this. Remember that they were 6 Iranians who danced to the Pharrell Williams song Happy. They were arrested for producing a vulgar clip that hurt public chastity, and that was the hardliners' move. The reformist move, or the moderate move, was to in fact have Rouhani tweet out that happiness, they shouldn't be, that you shouldn't be, boy, I'm really bombing this right now. We shouldn't be too hard on behaviors that are, okay. Something about joy and happiness, for sure. Shouldn't be too hard on behaviors causing happiness. That's still not right, but I'm not stopping this. Anyway, they got arrested. They got released after Rouhani's tweet, which was somewhat more eloquent than what I just tried to say. And then the hardliners made their move by still convicting them to 91 lashes in jail time. Then the dancers were released, though, because it was a suspended sentence. So everyone walked away happy. Well, no pun intended. And that was that. There have been other punches thrown by President Rouhani and others. Rouhani criticized the Revolutionary Guard Corps in a major speech that he gave, saying it's never good when any one institution gains too much military and economic power. That was a clear slap at the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and you could even have said to the Supreme Leader in that instance. The citizens in society in Iran see all of this play out, and the factionalism does play out in society as well. The hardline faction that took over in the early 1980s did impose their own cultural revolution, similar to China's in some ways, different in others, but they did shut down universities to Islamicize them and Islamicize society. In its own way, the schools were reopened then, not just shuttered like they were during Mao's revolution in China, cultural revolution in China. And we saw echoes of this after the Green Movement in 2009. echoes of this with new university restrictions on courses that threaten the Iranian leadership. Courses like women's studies, human rights, and so on. The citizens and society peace in Iran. Also, we saw great hope with the Tehran Spring, and we saw disappointment that they weren't able to institutionalize more of the reforms. Young people in Iran are very, very numerous. They're educated, they're motivated, they are impatient, and they are looking for more. And that's a thing the state has to deal with, because they are the generation that's upcoming, and they will be a generation that's going to be heard from. Civil society in Iran is relatively strong. It's developed but monitored, and you have to be careful, but civil society is undoubtedly on the increase in the Rouhani presidency. Media, we have both state-run and independent media. Again, that kind of waxes and wanes. More independent media, more civil society during the Khatami and Rouhani presidencies, less so under Ahmadinejad. Women in Iran do relatively well as well. They are highly educated. More women in Iran go to college than do men. And women can vote, women can run for office, women serve in office. They've had a female Nobel Prize winner. And generally, though, that glass ceiling is lower, and women tend to be underemployed. And that's like I said, the glass ceiling being lower there. So, but again, it's relative if you look at the map, but who's to say if that's the proper way to look at it or not. The Bazaris on the whole also are very powerful collectively, politically. They can exert their influence when they act in concert with one another, and they've done that on numerous occasions. And then I have these dates on here. These were uprisings that the state put down. Two of these, again, happened under Khatami, which was not cool for him to have to do, because these were student uprisings in Iran in regard to some heavy-handed tactics by the judiciary. And Khatami had to crack down on both of those. That hurt his popularity with the younger people. 2009, of course, was the Green Movement. The judiciary in Iran, I showed this picture and I'll take it off right now, but remember, they have cranked up the judiciary, or excuse me, cranked up the executions in the last several years. That's been the hardline judiciary's challenge to President Rouhani, and the executions are very public. They do it for political purposes. Lots of Sunni put to death, lots of Baha'i put to death, and it's been done to showcase the power of the judiciary and the hardliners in the face of the moderate Rouhani's presidency. Challenges in Iran remain the fact that it's not a legitimate democracy. It is a theocratic republic. Some elected elements, some unelected. You know about those. That is a major, major component of the AP test to understand and differentiate that. You have democratic elements, an elected president, an elected legislature, an elected assembly of experts, if you will. However, those institutions have the Guardian Council deciding who may run for office. And then you have the Supreme Leader, unelected. You have the Expediency Council, named by the leader. You have the Guardian Council, completely unelected, essentially named by the leader. Those are all elements of the state that stunt democracy in Iran, and they leave Iran longing for more, at least on the democratic front, by those who wish to have it. It's still underdeveloped from an economic standpoint, way too much reliance on oil. The rentier state thing continues to dog them. It's part of the resource curse we see in a lot of countries. The cleavages in Iran are substantial. The Shia-Sunni cleavage is intense. The social class cleavage, gap between rich and poor, is very, very substantial. Those are probably the big two. You also have a very real urban-rural cleavage that tends to hew along liberal conservative lines. I talked about the theocratic and democratic elements. How do you do that? How do you combine those? That's the conservative and reformist battle quite often. How do you bring both elements in there? How do you combine it? And reformists oftentimes say we don't wish to abolish all theocratic elements. We just want to make the democratic elements more powerful than the theocratic elements. Iran has to meet the rising expectations of a population. And remember that the rising expectations of a population in the 1970s proved to be revolutionary in Iran. And it looked that way for a bit in 2009, that it might be like that as well. But you have young people who are impatient. impatient, and they want better, and they want more. The Islamic Revolution itself provided a social base for the initial Iranian state after 1979. That social base has eroded as the population has aged. Not as many people now lived under the Shah. Charismatic leadership by Khomeini, the anti-Westernism, those things have kind of gone by the wayside in Iran, to a degree anyway. Relations with the international community region in the U.S., Iran seeks to be a hegemon in the region. Their number one rival in the region is Saudi Arabia, which is a staunch U.S. ally. Iran, of course, also very confrontational when it comes to Israel and the United States at times as well. We've said in class, both American conservatives and Iranian conservatives benefit from an acrimonious relationship with the other. It bolsters both of them. Neither one of them has a real benefit. There's not a positive in tamping down tensions there. The Rouhani presidency is into its sixth, seventh year now. And it seems as if you're going to have some of the same frustrations from Iranian citizens that you had after Khatami's presidency, that they had great hopes going in, and the nuclear deal was done. They were so excited about it. And then President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal. There's been much more bellicose statements from the U.S. in the post-Obama American foreign policy establishment, and the Iranians are once again feeling isolated, and Rouhani's presidency is slipping a little bit. Military state, I have that on there because Iran and the power of the Revolutionary Guard Corps seems to indicate that Iran is as much a military state as a theocratic republic, because the leader is tied to the Revolutionary Guard Corps to such a degree, because the Guard Corps controls so much of the economy. It's just tied in every way to what's taking place at the top echelons of Iran. The nuclear issue, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. Like I said, President Trump pulled the United States out of the deal that had been negotiated by President Obama and John Kerry. And so that one's up in the air, but it's a nationalistic thing. Iranians believe that they ought to have the right to a nuclear weapon, and they are united when told that they shouldn't. They want it for a deterrent. They want to have it for some regional dominance to challenge the Saudis or surpass the Saudis. And it's a pride thing. It's a great power thing to get a nuclear weapon, and that potentially is another reason for them. But they were super excited about the nuclear deal. Pedram taking a selfie with Obama there as Obama announced the nuclear deal back in 2015. There were the negotiators for the deal. You know, I just have this up here so we can have one more look at Ernie for inspiration before the AP test. So Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz. And Iran has, battle between the hardliners and the moderates and reformists again, right? The Iranians are dipping their toes in the water. They're allowing women into sports stadiums, and they're sitting in different sections, but they are able to attend matches that are attended by men also. So that's a relatively new one within the past few years. We really should probably take a snack break for this time and grab a burger at McDonald's, maybe a slice at Pizza Hut, which would be very, very tasty, one can only imagine, before we talk about the nuclear deal. This was negotiated by Kerry and by Javad Zarif. They were the two chief negotiators, of course, as the foreign emissaries. And the deal essentially was that Iran would curb its nuclear programs. Iran would continue enrichment at a very low level. If Iran didn't comply to those levels, then we would snap sanctions back into place. There had been an inspections regime set up, but there was a 24-day waiting period that made American conservatives nervous about getting in, and that is all done now because the Iranians have, in fact, seen the Americans pull out of the deal. Election 2016 for the parliament, the moderates and reformists, for the first time since 2000, gained more seats than the conservatives. So you have a plurality now for the moderates and reformists in the Majlis. which has tilted the power a little bit. This was a year after the nuclear deal. It indicated that the hardliners were ceding a little bit more power, and it was a concession by the supreme leader that the deal was popular with Iranians and they were going to roll with it a little bit. Then in the election of 2017, a year later, you have Hassan Rouhani winning re-election by what in Iran is a very wide margin. He got over 60% of the vote in this case, which we should know. And this was Rouhani, the moderate, winning very, very easily over his challengers, one of whom was a gentleman named Ibrahim Raisi, who is potentially going to be the next supreme leader if things continue to play out the way they are right now, because Khamenei seems to be tapping him a little bit. And we'd give you one more reminder on this page, apps people, that these are not the same person. You Americans unable to tell your Iranians apart. President Rouhani, Supreme Leader Khamenei. They have had protests in Iran economically. There has been a lot of dissension and a lot of unrest as inflation and unemployment continue to hit Iran, and the currency has fallen. So there's a society that's out there that's waiting for more, and they're impatient, like we said. And women also continue to move toward demanding greater equality. The headscarf movement, the Iranian women taking headscarves off at intersections rather, gained a lot of attention in late 2017, early 2018, and that will continue to be a thing where Iranian women push for more accommodation in terms of their lives and what's possible for them. And we will end on this one, that the factions in Iran, although very, very divided, they are united against President Trump. They are united against the Saudis, and they are less than thrilled with the United States right now. The quotes are essentially that we believed in the United States, we believed in the nuclear deal, we believed in what you said, and now you elected President Trump, who is speaking ill of us all the time, called us a terrorist nation, and so we don't trust America anymore. And not that they had great trust in us to begin, but they lost faith in us even further. So it's very nationalistic when it comes to this stuff, and the rivalry with the Saudis play into that as well. Think about Mr. Big Mouth that we saw in class from a hardline element, talking about his views on things. Didn't want to meet that relative with the tank top, or I guess she was a Westerner maybe who was wearing a tank top, which would be the end of it all. So we will stop there. You will dominate Iran on the advanced placement test, I have no doubt.